going to talk about proportion systems and grids. When I mention about grid systems, it's more like a vague term to kind of like tell you to line things up, look for spatial relationships, all that kind of stuff. It's not putting in a literal grid on things. It's more or less a way of lining things up or organizing within graphic design. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk introduction to proportion. All right, proportion, a relationship between elements in a design regarding scale or size, scale, and visual weight. The purpose is to help to create harmony and balance in visual interest and compositions. Proportion is about relationships between elements that create unity in design. All right, so proportion is where you take something and you can create some visual interest, visual harmony. And in the case of an ad like this, it's like you see the little popcorn kernels are becoming more like people, and setting them like out of proportion. Same thing here, fingertips and then a very, very small glass. It creates attention. It brings focus to what's here because we see things on a daily basis, and when something is not right, we're attracted to that. Same thing here. Even though the actual things, the elephant and the truck, are probably within proportion, all right, knowing that here we're putting something that is kind of like, it's very heavy. The proportions are very heavy, and it creates some kind of tension. The importance of proportion, it defines hierarchy and guides the viewer's eye. It can evoke emotion and convey information more effectively. All right. So in the sense here, you can kind of see that the proportions of visual unity are here. So the spaces around that is kind of like forming more of a target to this. And same thing here. All right. The proportions are still there as correct proportions, but we're looking at the space, the size of things, and looking at its size compared to, that small little iPhone can hold that big pile of information that is there. Proportion systems is a golden ratio, which is a natural proportion seen in art, architecture, and design. Widely used for layout design, logo creation, and composition. We also have the rule of thirds, which divides a design into 3x3 grids, placing important elements along these lines or intersections. Commonly used in photography and layout design for dynamic balance. All right. If you're a photographer, rule of thirds is something that you have to understand. All right. So here, the golden ratio, it's like an infinite amount of spirals that kind of like divide against each other. And it will go more like a seashell type of design. And when it divides everything in, its calculations. So the golden ratio is kind of like used in this type of design for the Apple logo. And you can see more applications of the golden ratio that is being used. Rule of thirds sets up a grid where you see, divide it into 3x3 sections. So here you can see that along this line here and the focus intersection points form a lot more interest and drag our attention to this, and then it falls along this particular line here. Same thing. Photos don't always have to be centered. They create a little bit more visual interest when they are set off center, and that is where the rule of thirds kind of comes into play. This person here with the dog is off to the left instead of centered or right. Same thing here with the tree. It's off center. Creates some visual interest. Or here, We've got the couple here standing on a cliff, and this would serve a little bit. This would be very, very different if they were facing the other way. And instead of their eyes are being pointed in this direction, you see that the visual cues that are being seen are here. So grids in graphic design. A grid is a structure of interesting horizontal and vertical lines used to organize content. Grids provide a consistent structure to align elements, helps designers to maintain balance and harmony across layouts. So a grid is essentially what I said, is a way of lining things up and looking at proportions. So if you see here, you see that these lines are all identical. All right, and you look at these two columns here. This column is the same width as this column. And then this column's here the same width as these. Wim Cromwell actually used the grid literally in a lot of his work, such as right here where you can see he used a little grid to create his designs. But a lot of times he would use the grid in different ways and different fashions. The types of grids, which is manuscript grid, simple grid for blocks of text used in books and documents. All right. A column grid, which divides the page into vertical columns, which is commonly used in news or magazines and newspapers. Modular grids is a grid with consistent row and columns allowing for more flexibility, like web design elements. Hierarchical grids, in a regular grid that responds to content hierarchy, useful and complex designs. So like this could be viewed as a manuscript grid where you kind of see basically two columns, kind of like in a book. This can be referred to as like a column grids where each thing is set up as columns that are equal space and equal width. Modular grids are like these where you kind of see different areas and different sections that are a lot of elements are lined up, but they form these modules within a design. And then hierarchical grids, where you basically get drawing your attention to something, and then it leads to another area. So proportions with grids is using grids helps maintain proportional relationships between elements. Alignment, grid lines guide where to place text, images, or other elements. And consistency ensures spacing and margins are even across the layout. So like the column grids and stuff, we kind of keep those lineups there equal and the spaces between columns equal. So common mistakes in grid design: ignoring margins and gutters results in crowded designs and poor readability. Paying attention to margins can add a lot more space around text, especially when you get to the edge of a page or a fold line in a publication. Overcomplicating grids can lead to a cluttered, busy look. Okay, again, adding too much is always something that you just don't want to do. And inconsistent proportions, uneven elements disrupt harmony. There's no harmony in that. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop there, and I will see you in the next video.